Pop quiz. How long does it take to form a new healthy habit? Is it A, 18 days, B, 18 weeks, or C, 18 months? Drop your answer in the comments below, but no cheating. I'm gonna tell you the answer in just a few seconds. In this video, I'll show you 6 ways I help my clients make new healthy habits and break bad unhealthy habits. Make sure you're watching to the end so that you'll learn how I help my clients do this without feeling overwhelmed. According to a 2009 study published in the European Journal of Social Psychology, it takes 18 to 254 days to form a new habit. So for that pop quiz, if you answered A, 18 days, or B, 18 weeks, you were right. So when it comes to changing our habits, there really are only 2 questions. How do we form new habits and how do we break bad habits? So let's start with how to make new habits. So one strategy is to use your environment. This reminds me of a client I had that had an issue with overeating. So to address this issue, she was trying to form the habit of using a countdown timer when she was eating. Now, maybe you're wondering why the heck she's trying to use a countdown timer. That using a timer is a strategy for a different video. I'm sure I'll get to that in future videos. But for now, just know the habit she was trying to form was using a countdown timer when she was eating. I asked her, where does she normally eat? She said at the kitchen table or at her desk. So in order to help her form this new habit, I told her to buy a cheap timer, put one timer on the kitchen table and put another timer on her desk. So now that she has the timer on the table and at her desk, she'll have that environmental cue, seeing the timer as a reminder to use it. And that's how she ended up forming this new habit. The next strategy is to combine the new habit that you're trying to form with old habits you already have. So this reminds me of a client that I had who was having trouble hitting her step goal. So the new habit she was trying to form was getting more steps in throughout the day. So the old habit she already performed on a daily basis was brushing her teeth. So we took her old habit, which is brushing her teeth, and combine it with the new habit, which is walking throughout the day together. So she ended up just brushing her teeth while walking around her home, and that's how she was able to establish this new habit and get more steps. The next strategy we'll talk about is adopting a new identity. So this doesn't mean you're getting on the black web and you're stealing somebody's identity and out there scamming. No. What it means is we know that our self-identity shapes our future behaviors. For example, let's say there was a person who just came to Christ, became a new Christian, born again Christian, right? And what they're trying to do is trying not to sin. So instead of trying not to sin, they could just adopt a new identity and think of themselves as a follower of Christ. This new identity leads to a shift in mindset, and now that person would be thinking, what would Jesus do? And that would impact the daily choices that they would make. The next strategy is to use positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement basically means a reward. So a reward could be something like a low-calorie, high-fiber brownie after every workout. It could be something as simple as having a calendar on the wall and putting a green check mark for every day that you stick to your diet. Now, I know that one kind of seems silly, like what the heck, how's that a reward? But seeing that, having that visual reward system, seeing those green check marks reminds you that you did something, you accomplished something. It's like having a trophy, and seeing that every day, especially towards the end of the month, hopefully you're seeing a lot more check marks and seeing that calendar full of green is rewarding. And when choosing a reward, we want one that's low calorie, that's healthy, and it's best if that reward is received soon after it's earned. All right, the next strategy is using accountability. So accountability increases motivation, increases commitment, and follow through. So before you can use accountability, you must have a clearly defined goal and a clear, easy way to identify whether that goal is achieved or not achieved. So for instance, that could be something like eating only the foods on your assigned food list. Either you did it or you didn't. So forms of accountability could be internal accountability or external accountability. An example of internal accountability would be using those green check marks on the calendar, like I mentioned. External accountability can come from an individual or from a group. So if it's coming from an individual, An example could be like a fat loss or health coach who does weekly coaching sessions with their client. Group accountability could come from a group of people who are all working towards a similar goal, and they actively share the outcomes and their goals. So the good thing about a group accountability is that you not only receive accountability from the group, but you also give it to the group, and that can be a little bit more of a motivating factor as well for some people. So one interesting and motivating thing that those researchers found in that study I had mentioned earlier was that missing an opportunity to implement and exhibit one habit didn't really affect the habit formation process. So if you messed up once, that didn't mean that you weren't able to form that habit. So with that in mind, that means that when we're working towards establishing habits, we could be really forgiving to ourselves. However, I will say I like the idea. I think Peter Attia, he says that when he's trying to implement a habit, he just makes sure that he doesn't have 2 misses in a row. So let's say if the habit you're trying to form was to eat only foods off of a food list every day, and maybe you veer off that list for on Monday, make sure you don't do it 2 days in a row. So you gotta keep it tight on Tuesday. All right, so we just only talked about how to form new habits. Let's move on to how to break bad habits. To do this, we actually use some of the strategies to form new habits, forming a new identity, using positive reinforcement, and using accountability. One of the key differences with breaking a bad habit is identifying the trigger. Because if you can identify the trigger, then you can prevent the trigger. So a trigger could include something like a person's environment. For example, let's say there's a person who has the bad habit of buying junk food on their way home from work every day they work. So if that person sat with a coach and they thought about it and they assessed the situation, they might see that a trigger would be driving past a convenience store when they're tired and hungry. And the solution would be to alter the environment by keeping healthy snacks in the car, so that way that person's not hungry, and or they could take a different route home when they're coming from work. So as promised, I'm going to now tell you how I help my clients implement these strategies without feeling overwhelmed. And that starts with prioritizing habits. So first, we want to realize that habits will either have a high impact or a low impact. So what do I mean by that? For example, let's say there's a habit of hitting a calorie goal. And then let's say another habit would be to drink an additional 4 cups of water every day, right? So which one do you think would have the higher impact? Clearly, like decreasing your calories would have a higher impact, especially if the goal is weight loss, than just drinking more water. That person may already drink a lot of water, so it may not do much. And then you also have to consider habits will just be, in general, easy to implement or hard to implement. Usually, going back to those other 2 habits I just mentioned, hitting a calorie goal could be considered a lot harder and more difficult than just drinking more water. So if we put all that together, we know that habits will fall into one of 4 buckets: easy to implement and low impact, easy to implement and high impact, difficult to implement and low impact, and difficult to implement and high impact. I usually have my clients start with the easiest overall habit, and once they integrate that new habit, then I'll move on to the next easy to implement high impact habit and just go from there. Did this info give you any ideas on habits that you're trying to form or habits you're trying to break? If so, drop them in the comments so we can all learn. Make sure you stay tuned for more. I have a lot more videos coming. Thank you for watching.